Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Eric Mueller Show. This is the podcast where we explore what makes any successful person's inner clock tick. Today we'll be talking with Jodi Woelkerling. She has decades of experience in the corporate world, and she's learned that resilience is a key feature of every enduringly successful individual and organizational culture. Now, the modern workplace is filled with constant challenges and competing priorities, both for the businesses and for the individuals that make up those organizations. Jodi has found that resilience is such a key component of effectively navigating these challenges. What is resilience, you might ask? Jodi's passionate about assisting businesses to build an enduring resilient culture at the whole culture level. Now that includes the various levels of leadership within that organization, and it also includes every single individual that makes up the pieces of the organization. Nobody on the team is left out. Everyone is important to establishing this resilient culture that Jodi's talking about. Now, Jodi's also released a new book. It's called World-Class Leadership. It's tailored specifically towards executive-level leaders within organizations. Be sure to give it a read. Check the show notes for the link. Without further ado, let's jump on over to the interview with the second Australian entrepreneur to appear on the Eric Mueller Show. Let's get after it. Welcome back to the Eric Mueller Show. This is Eric Mueller, your host, and you're at the podcast where we explore what makes any successful person's inner clock tick. Today, I've got a very special guest with me. I've got Jodi Woelkerling. Jodi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Eric.
Absolutely. So I really want to start off. So you have a pretty unique background here. You had a leadership role in a corporate banking environment in Australia a little bit earlier in your career. And you experience firsthand the impact that stress can have on both yourself and members of your team. And you've been quoted as saying, "We don't have to accept this stress as a way of life. There's a better option out there." Would you mind sharing what you mean by that?
Absolutely. I think stress has become such a common element in the way we live life in the modern environment. And this is pre-COVID as well as obviously since COVID. It has become so common and almost to the stage where it's become a norm of the way people live their life, and almost to the point where they don't realise when they're stressed because it's just kind of their state of being. And part of my real mission is to let people know, listen, that's a problem long term. There is a better option. There are things that you can do to make sure that you keep yourself in a good state. And yes, there are stresses. There's always going to be stresses out there and things that test our resilience. But there are ways to control it so it doesn't have anywhere near as much of a negative effect on your well-being and your life at whole.
Yeah, and Jodi, do you believe that stress is more internally, is it caused by the person, the individual, or is it more on the outside factors? I mean, I'm just curious because I tend to believe that, it's a little bit subjective in a way as far as what that percentage split is. But what are your thoughts on that?
It's such a good question. I think it's an element of both. So, for example, you can have two people in the same situation, one who so it could be a situation that is quite stressful, so to say a working environment. One has more of an attitude and a way of approaching things where it doesn't really have that much of a personal effect on them. And then you can have another person who pretty much takes it on and it becomes an emotional and stressful situation for them. So there's definitely an internal thing of how you respond to the stresses in your life. But there are also different situations that have different degrees of stresses, and workplaces are a fantastic example of this. So some cultures are set up that has more of a sort of a support and an environment that's more conducive to dealing with stresses better, because there's always going to be stresses, and then there's some environments where it is inherently stressful and they have a lot higher indications of that. So things like staff turnover and burnout and that sort of stuff. So my that was a long answer, but my summary answer to your question, to me, it's a combination of both.
Okay. Yeah, and that kind of ties in perfectly. I'll just give you a small background of where I'm coming from here. So I actually just recently became in a leadership role. I'm a new manager here at a pharmacy, at a Hy-Vee pharmacy. So I'm curious to ask you, and you've learned that developing effective organizational culture is a key component of reducing that stress in the workplace. How does a new leader who's joining a team begin to build that culture that will help their team succeed?
I love this question. So the first side always is to work on yourself as a leader. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So leaders basically set the tone. So if you have a leader that is in control of their own stress and their own resilience, they are, first of all, setting the tone for everybody else's behaviour in the team. And they are also setting an example for sort of a more desirable kind of way of behaving. The other side as a leader with developing your own resilience is that when people are stressed, there's certain physiological things that happen. Things like the thinking part of your brain doesn't function as well because you're operating more out of the fight, flight, more primitive part of your brain, just a physiological reaction of stress. And that's just one thing with stress, but with a leader who develops themselves, they are more able to think clearly because they're operating from that clear thought process. They're also more likely to respond to the stresses that happen more from a state of calm and a less emotionally triggered point, because when people are emotionally triggered by stress is when they do things like make decisions or talk to people in a way that's not going to be best for the long term. So with leaders, the first side is definitely absolute key. First thing is to work on yourself and your own self-development. But also in terms of setting up a culture for your staff, is really, and I'm guessing with your situation with working in a pharmacy, how many people in your team?
So I think my team is probably between 10 and 20 people, and it's growing right now. We're bringing in some new people, and we've had a little bit of a challenge just getting people to be acclimated to the company itself. There's a lot of new faces, so in myself included. So I think that's been a challenge. But yeah, I'd say somewhere between 10 and 20 is probably the team that I supervise. Okay.
So a team of 10 to 20, you can develop some sort of personal relationship with every single person in that team. So with that sort of size team, you want to set up a situation where everybody feels that they are heard and they are valued for their role in that position, because people are part of human nature. People who feel valued and heard are more likely to be motivated to do a much better job that's better for you, better for the customers, better for the business at large. And there's various ways of doing that. That obviously gets a little bit trickier when there's larger organisations. So that's when you get sort of layers of management. And I mean, just say if you've got an organisation of 200 staff, it is very unlikely that the CEO is going to have a personal relationship with everybody in the business. They might know their names if they're really good at that, but it's very unlikely they're going to have that personal connection with everybody. So then there needs to be things set up in the culture that people still feel heard and supported through various ways. So whether that's, feedback things, through that's leadership development, leadership structure and all that sort of stuff. But, yeah, you really want to set up environments where people feel safe, they feel supported, they feel encouraged. There's growth for improvement. There's the potential to try new things and step outside of the comfort zone, or to say new ideas without it coming back negatively on them. There's a whole lot of things, but it does depend a little bit on the size of the team.
Okay. Yeah, I love that answer. And my plan is to have them listen to this episode. So I'm hoping that we can really kind of tease out some ways that I can help them, create that resilient culture and have something that's going to persist and last going into the future. And so let's just dive in and look at that term resilience. So you mentioned that a few times. Audience members listening, you can Google the term resilience, but I want to hear Jodi say what she thinks that term means.
Absolutely. So I look at it as two sides of the coin. So the first side is when there are stresses in your life, because we always have things that are going to cause stressors in us. The first side is to, as much as possible, developing in yourself so that you can stay in that state of calm as much as possible. And there's various things that you can do in order to encourage that and to develop that in yourself. So that's the first side. The second side, we're all human beings, and the reality is that very few people are going to stay in that calm Zen state 24/7. There might be a handful of spiritual gurus in the world, but that's probably it. Nearly everybody is going to feel stress at some stage or in some form. So the second side of resilience is when you are feeling stressed and things are affecting you, one, to recognize it in yourself as quickly as possible, because that's halfway to fixing it. A lot of people are stressed and they don't realize they're stressed. So the first step is to recognize it, and the second step is to bring yourself back to calm as quickly as possible. That's sort of my take on resilience. And it's interesting, I was challenged on this a couple of days ago of, well, what about when I'm not feeling great and I'm not in a great position, but I have this can-do attitude and I'm going to get through this? Isn't that resilience? And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. So I need to add probably a third element to my definition here, that it is about having that internal mindset and that internal fortitude that when things are happening, and I know your focus is on success, and this is one of the key elements of successful people, that things will go wrong. There's going to be failures, there's going to be setbacks, to have that internal fortitude and that internal responsibility to create something better for yourself, to actually get yourself beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of building off that even further, going to the next layer here, what is, if you had to boil it down to just one essential characteristic that a leader needs to have to create that resilient culture? So being self-aware and all that, kind of over-encompassing, is there like even just one essential characteristic you can think of that a leader needs to have to do that?
Emotional intelligence. So any great leader in terms of culture of an organisation has emotional intelligence, which there's two parts to that. The first part is really knowing themselves, knowing their own triggers, knowing their strengths, their weaknesses, what makes them excel, what they need extra help with, that sort of stuff. So very much knowing themselves emotionally. And the second side of it is being able to relate to people and empathise and connect with other people. So to me, that is consistently the key of any leader who is good at managing a culture over the long term sustainably.
Yeah, and that ties a lot into, I've studied leadership as a student in pharmacy school and going back to my undergraduate studies. And we use the term being emotionally hijacked. And it kind of sounds like that's a little bit of what you're talking about with resilience, is to not allow yourself to become emotionally hijacked, where you're stressed out, but you don't actually realize that. And it hijacks your emotions in a way that affects your behavior, and that can negatively impact your ability to lead your team.
Oh, 100%. Totally agree. And that, you're right, that is pretty much what I'm talking about. It's on the same lines.
Yeah, it seems to be a common thread. You research enough leadership principles. I mean, you're going to kind of come back to some of the similar topics, but you've worked with several different companies in different industries as you've transitioned from, you were in the corporate sector, and now you have you're self-employed, in which you are coaching and teaching people how to build culture in companies and how to become better leaders, and these topics we've been discussing here. What are some of the major behaviors or workplace norms that you've identified that are problematic in the workplace, that go opposite of the direction that we want to go with this culture?
Yeah, so it very much depends on the individual workplace. There are differences in different workplaces, but there's some common things that come up as problematic. So um, things like having unrealistic demands on staff. So that could be unrealistic demands in terms of performance, work hours, that sort of stuff. Gosh, I'll only go through a handful, but there's lots of them.
Yeah.
Job insecurity is a big one. If people don't feel secure in their job, or even if they think that their colleague is not secure in their job, that can cause all sorts of problems. I mentioned before about people need to feel valued, cared for, and supported. There's a big indication that even just having a feeling that somebody in the organisation has their back and is invested in their development, that alone makes an enormous difference. There was a major study that was done in Australia that basically said if the staff said lots, but one of the things it said is if the staff feel that the CEO is committed to their well-being and authentically committed to their well-being, that has an enormous impact on people's stress levels and people's engagement and in the workplace, and things like productivity, staff turnover, that sort of stuff. There's lots of them. Having no sense of purpose of the organisation or the individual's role in the organisation is a major issue as well. Whether people realise it or not, we're inspired by the purpose of what we do. We want to actually make what we do every day to be important and to make a difference. So having that sense of purpose is a big, either can be a big plus, or obviously lack of is a big negative. But that's a handful of them.
No, that's a great sampling of them, and it definitely ties in with I think that there's probably a lot of businesses out there that struggle to manage the mental well-being of their staff, and I think that we've seen with the COVID pandemic. I mean, people are having trouble staffing their businesses. People are getting burnt out, especially in healthcare. People are feeling very overworked. Are there any specific ways that the CEO could indicate that they do care about the mental well-being? Are there workshops that they can have people attend, or resources they can give them, books? Like, is there anything that you can think of that a leader of an organization could do to make sure that the mental well-being is a priority?
Yep. The definitely communicating that it is, and having that open, transparent culture where things like mental challenges, it's an okay thing to talk about it, and having some sort of systematic way of connecting with people. As I said it before, it depends on the organisation as to how that's done and how widely, and actually having ways of getting a snapshot of what are the challenges of your staff, what are the things that they need, what are they not getting, what's important and what isn't. So I guess I'm saying the same point again, but people need to feel valued, supported and heard. And as a leader, that needs to be a priority around setting that culture that it is transparent and it is open in terms of acknowledging challenges and that sort of stuff, and have those lines of communication. So whether that's formalised, or probably the best way is personal relationships, so that people do have that sense of feeling, and CEOs can set that up even regardless of the organisation. There's ways of doing that, whether you've got a team of 5 people or if you've got a team of 5,000. Obviously, the ways of doing it are very different, but yeah, that's probably the key.
Yeah. And when we talk about this resilient culture, so if we take company A and company B and they're in different industries, is building that culture in each of those companies going to be different? Like if you have a big tech company in Silicon Valley versus a pharmacy in the Midwest, like there's obviously got to be a difference in terms of building the culture, but you might share your experiences if you can about how you've seen that firsthand in your experiences as a coach.
Yep. So there are definitely overlying things that are common regardless of industry, definitely. But there are obviously things that are specific to to particular. So what you gave as an example, a pharmacy versus a Silicon Valley. So a pharmacy, you're dealing with a situation where you're probably dealing with people who are not well or who are being stressed in some way. You could have, like, I don't know, the mother who's had a crying baby for the last 12 hours and it has her wit's end and just goes, what's going on? How can you help me? You're also dealing with situations where, because you're giving medications to a certain extent, and you'd know this, I'm not in this industry, but there is an element of life and death of what you do, that if you make
Absolutely.
a mistake, it could have very serious consequences. Yeah. So that's very different stresses. So you're dealing often with stressed people, regardless of what's going on, or people who are compromised in some way with life or death consequences of what you do. Whereas oppose that to the Silicon Valley, with the industry the experience that I've had in tech industries, very, very high paced, constantly changing. You need to be constantly on the cutting edge of what's going on, and you need to be constantly. There seems to be a lot of juggling of different stakeholders in that sort of environment. And what I'm saying, that's because that's the example that you gave. But
Absolutely.
Yes, there are things that are overlying commonalities in culture in any industry. But yes, there are definitely things that are specific to different industries. So the stresses of a teacher are going to be very, very different to the stresses of an accountant. Versus the stresses of somebody working in construction, or, gosh, you could keep on going on. So, yeah, there is a certain degree of different things depending on the situations of different industries.
Yeah, and so I'm really curious to know, and I'm sure people listening are as well, how did you make this career change, so to speak? How did you go from being in a corporate environment, you're leading a team, you're in Australia in one of the bigger banking companies leading a team directly. What caused you to make that switch and realize, okay, now I know what I want to do, and it's not going to be in that corporate sector. I'm going to go, work for myself, so to speak.
Yep. The origin of it was very much from my own challenges. So, like a lot of coaches out there, my area that I specialised in came out of my own challenges. So while I've worked sort of in the corporate world for a long period of time, and I could do those roles, stress and me being affected by stress was a consistent thing through it. Now, obviously, there's peaks and troughs as different things go on, but I was consistently very adversely affected by stress. And then a few years back, I reached a pretty not a great point. I think I was very close to burnout. It was affecting the way I related to people. I was having certain physical reactions in myself and concerns that it was basically my whole being was screaming, this isn't good for you.
Yeah.
And I almost have those, I called them either aha moments or light bulb moments where I went, there has to be something better than this. And it started me on a quest that hasn't stopped since, where it came out of very much of how do I do me better so that I'm capable and successful doing something I love, and I'm not having this stress as a constant theme and it's not causing me issues. So it started very much from that. And I have I'm kind of almost like a teacher by nature. So the fact that I was developing myself is almost like a drive. Okay, this is something I wanted to share with the world and to help others with. So helping myself, it morphed into helping others, which kind of morphed into, because of my corporate background, being leaders, which morphed into business culture. So, yeah, very much originated from my own challenges.
Yeah, and it pushed you into the direction that you were meant to go. So I'm glad to hear that. That's very inspiring to hear that, if you're experiencing challenges, and people listening here, if you're experiencing that stress, if you're experiencing, difficulties in your current environment, there is hope that, you can make a change. You don't have to be committed to something forever if it's not right for you. And so I appreciate you sharing that, Jodi, and thank you for helping inspire the listeners of the show. And so, as I mentioned earlier, so the real reason I started this podcast was to really explore what makes any successful person keep driven, keep their inner clock ticking. So I'm curious to ask you, do you have one single driving force that you can say in your life that keeps your inner clock ticking towards success?
For me personally, I've always had an inner calling to help other people. And I guess for each individual person, it's about knowing what's your inner calling and what's your inner kind of vision and purpose in yourself. But for me, it's about helping others. And because this is such a common issue, and an issue that was a major issue for me, that I kind of worked out how to deal with it in myself. It's always a work in progress, but I'm dramatically in a better state than I was, say, 5-6 years ago. Know your purpose, listen to your inner gut of what you want to do, which is basic to answer your question, what I did, and follow it and be persistent in it when there's setbacks or things take longer than expected or all that sort of stuff. So it's about listening to that inner calling, because I'm very much a person who wants to help other people. So, yep.
Yeah, and you found your calling, so that's great. That I'm sure that you've maybe had your definition of success change then over time. So I'm going to ask you, how do you define the term success? So maybe it's changed, maybe it hasn't. I know for myself, even in the last several months that I've been running this show, my definition has changed and morphed a little bit after I've talked to each person that I've interviewed. So I'm curious to ask you, Jodi, what is your definition of success?
Tell you what, it is such a good question. And I have never been a proponent of success is the money in the car and all that sort of stuff. No, to me it is about spending your days doing something that you love and that you are driven to do. And obviously there is a financial element of it, in that you need for your you need a sense of financial security and your main kind of needs met. But for me personally, it's about doing what you love and doing something where work doesn't feel like work, that you're inspired to do it every day. And that's going to be very different for different people. But, listen to your gut as, am I happy doing what I'm doing? If I didn't have to work tomorrow, so just say you won the lottery and you didn't have to work tomorrow, would this still be something that you chose to do? That's my definition. Happy to work, happy, and it's something you can see yourself doing over the long term.
Yeah, that's a great thought. Really, really gets the gears turning in the mind, I'm sure, for those of you listening too. If you hit the Powerball tomorrow in the U.S. here, would you continue? Would you still go to school? Would you still go to your day job? What would be the thing that you do that make you most happy? And I think it really is a perspective change. I feel like when you think about it in that way. So. Appreciate that reflection there, Jodi. That's incredible. I'm really, kind of geeked up to ask you, what's your favorite aspect of being an entrepreneur? What do you love the most about being self-employed, about not having to, go work for somebody else, really? What's your favorite part about that?
Choosing my own focus, my own what I do every day, in my own direction, my own goals, my own management of my own time. So for me, it's probably an independence and control, self-empowerment thing.
Being able to work on yourself, being able to, like you've said earlier, I mean, if you're going to develop yourself and to be a good leader, so if someone listening, if you're a new manager on a team like myself, you got to work on yourself first to be able to lead a team well. So I'm happy to hear that you're enjoying your ability to do that and develop yourself on the side. I'm sure, was there a transitionary period where you had to kind of build up this business prior to leaving your corporate job?
Yes, so there was a period of overlap, definitely, where I was doing both. Yep.
Yeah, I'd have to guess it'd be hard to just jump right into it without having some type of revenue being generated. I mean, I'm sure there are people that take that plunge and just just put their 2 weeks in and just send it. But for most people, they probably have to overlap for 6 months to a year or even longer than that.
Yeah, it's very individual. There's also other people who they do take the jump for whatever reason. They'll do things like, I don't know, a part-time job on the side to get a little bit of money coming in, work at the local supermarket, whatever. So there's another group of people who do that as well, because doing a corporate or high responsibility job and setting up a business on the side is tricky on focus and energy levels and that sort of stuff. So it's very much, again, what's going to be the best thing for me? Have I got the financial position where I can kind of step away? And if I don't, what's the best option for me? Run both? Or do I walk away from the job and do something that's sort of low skilled on the side to make sure there's some income coming in the meantime? Very much an individual decision.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I've got one more burning question for you, and then I know I want to get to talking about, you have a book that just was recently released, recently coming out here, so we want to talk about that. But I want to ask you, so when I go into work tomorrow, so I've been off for 2 days, I work this upcoming weekend, so I've had 2 middle of the week days off. But when I go into work tomorrow, what is the one thing I should do to engage with my team members to make sure that I am building a culture, that's going in the right direction? So I started less than 6 weeks ago now. What would be that one thing I should do when I walk in the door tomorrow?
I would say whether you do it one-on-one, group, or via a survey or whatever, is find out more from them. So really listen to them. So what's important to them? What are the challenges? What frustrates them? What is their vision of the future? What's the vision of the role in their life, so work-life balance. So really get to know them and find out what's important to them, because unless you have that understanding and that knowledge, you're making changes, and you obviously, I can tell by the way you're talking, you really, really want to do a good job with what you're doing with your team. But unless you actually find out from them and listen to them, you're still guessing. Yeah. So very much find out from them what's important, what can improve, and set up those lines of communication and start to establish those lines of trust, so that down the future, if something's a problem, they feel safe to voice stuff to you. So to find out things now, but also to set up that trust for the future.
Yep. Yep, that definitely aligns with the type of leader I want to be. An open communication channel, two-way street. I want to know where you're coming from. I want you to know where I'm coming from, so we can both progress towards that goal. We're going to have different goals for our own individual lives, but to get through this working day where we need to get from point A to point B, how can we do it together? So yeah, I think that answer is great, and I'll get right on it. So before we wrap up here, Jodi, I just want to make sure we talk about your book. So World-Class Leadership, that's the title of your book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So give us the pitch on that. Let's go.
So it is written for corporate leaders. So that's your CEOs and your sort of your high-end leaders. So like your CFOs, your CIOs, your heads of sales, that sort of stuff. So it is around almost like an awareness piece around what are some of the really key issues that come up as cultural challenges in businesses that cause businesses problems over the long term. So they break down things like trust and collaboration and productivity and staff retention and all those things in the end. For a lot of businesses, we're obviously trying to make money. So all those things in the end sort of have major effects on profitability as well. So it's an awareness piece around these are a lot of the patterns that are out there as to cultural issues that cause problems. So, yeah, if anyone wants a copy, the best way is probably just to pop on my website, which is just jodiwoelkerling.com, and there's a book option on there, so you can find out more from there.
Perfect. Yeah, and everybody listening, I will tag that in the show notes, so you know where to find that. At the bottom of the show notes, I'll have Jodi's personal website on there, as well as a link to that book specifically. So we'll make sure that we can get people to, whoever's listening that's a CEO out there, a CFO, you want to read this book, the 10 critical insights every leader needs to know to foster this resilient culture that we've been talking about for the last half an hour. So we'll get them on there. And Jodi, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been great to talk to you. I've really leave this talk inspired to go and be the best leader I can be, and really, put my best foot forward to build this culture that you have experienced in your life as the way to do it. So
beautiful. Thank you so much for having me on, Eric. And as I said, I can tell from the questions you asked and the things that you've said that you've got that drive to be a really good leader. So I have zero doubt that you're going to do really well. So
I appreciate that. I'll circle back in 5 years and listen to this episode again, and hopefully I'll be humbled by that and say, yeah, Jodi was onto something there. I did all right after all, right?
Very good.
Thanks, Jodi. Well, you have a wonderful evening, and thanks so much for being a part of the Eric Mueller Show.
Thanks, Eric.